In 1963, the average cost of a year at a public university in America was about $2,000. Not per semester, per year. Tuition, fees, room, board, everything. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $20,000 in today's money. So you'd think that's about what college should cost now, right? Wrong. The actual average cost today is over $30,000 per year at public universities and over $50,000 at private ones. That's not inflation. That's something else entirely. So what the hell happened between 1963 and now that made college one of the most expensive things an American family will ever pay for? The story starts in a place you might not expect: World War II. When millions of soldiers came home in the 1940s, the government created the GI Bill, which paid for veterans to go to college. Suddenly, universities that had been elite institutions for the wealthy were flooded with working-class students who had their tuition covered by Uncle Sam. Colleges expanded rapidly. They built new dorms, hired more professors, opened new programs, and here's the key part. The government was footing the bill, so schools didn't have to worry about whether students could actually afford it. This set a precedent that would shape everything that came after. Fast forward to the 1960s and 70s, the federal government decided that college shouldn't just be for veterans, it should be accessible to everyone. So they created a massive system of grants and loans. The idea was noble. If money is the only thing stopping talented kids from getting an education, let's remove that barrier. The government started guaranteeing student loans, which meant banks would lend to anyone because there was zero risk. If a student couldn't pay back the loan, the government would. This sounds great in theory, and for a while it worked. Enrollment exploded. The percentage of Americans with college degrees shot up. The middle class expanded. It looked like a massive success. But here's where the economics get weird. When the government guarantees that students can borrow essentially unlimited amounts of money for college, what do you think colleges do? They raise prices. And why wouldn't they? If your customers suddenly have access to tens of thousands of dollars in loans that they can't escape even through bankruptcy, you'd be leaving money on the table if you didn't charge more. This is called the Bennett hypothesis, named after Reagan's education secretary William Bennett, who pointed this out in 1987. He argued that increases in financial aid don't actually make college more affordable. They just give universities permission to charge more. And the data backs this up. Every time the government increased the maximum loan amount students could take out, tuition went up by a similar amount within a few years.
But it's not just about loans. In the 1970s and 80s, something else happened. State governments started cutting funding to public universities. This is crucial because public universities used to be heavily subsidized by state tax dollars. In the 1970s, states covered about 70% of the cost of running public universities. Students only paid about 30% through tuition. But over the decades, states slashed higher education budgets to free up money for other things, like Medicaid, prisons, and K-12 education. By 2020, that ratio had completely flipped. Students were now covering about 70% of costs through tuition, and states only contributed about 30%. When states cut funding by $1, universities didn't cut costs by $1, they raised tuition by $1. And because students could just borrow more money through federal loans, universities faced no market resistance to these price increases. Now let's talk about what universities actually started spending money on, because this is where things get really interesting. You'd think that as tuition skyrocketed, most of that money would go to professors and classrooms, right? Wrong. The number of professors hasn't increased nearly as much as tuition. What has exploded is administration. Between 1975 and 2005, the number of full-time administrators at universities grew by 85%, while the number of full-time faculty only grew by 50%. Universities started hiring armies of administrators, diversity officers, mental health counselors, career services staff, student life coordinators, assistant deans, associate vice provosts. Many of these roles are genuinely helpful, but they're expensive. And unlike professors who teach multiple classes, most administrators support the institution in ways that don't directly generate revenue. So more administrators means higher costs, which means higher tuition. Then there's the amenities arms race. In the 1980s and 90s, universities figured out that luxury amenities could attract more students. High school seniors started choosing colleges based not just on academic reputation, but on which campus had the nicest gym, the best dining halls, the most impressive dorms. So schools started building rock climbing walls, lazy rivers, gourmet dining facilities, apartment-style housing with private bathrooms. Ohio State has a rec center that cost $140 million. LSU has a lazy river. These things are funded by tuition and fees. A 2010 study found that for every 10% increase in spending on student services, tuition increased by about 7%, but there was no similar effect from increased spending on instruction.
Let's zoom out for a second and talk about market forces, because college has a weird economic structure that makes it almost impossible for prices to go down naturally. In most markets, when something gets too expensive, consumers either stop buying it or competitors enter the market with cheaper alternatives. But college doesn't work that way. First, college has become essentially mandatory for middle-class jobs. In the 1970s, you could get a decent-paying job with just a high school diploma. Now, employers require bachelor's degrees for jobs that didn't require them before. So, demand for college is incredibly inelastic. People will pay almost anything because they feel they have no choice. Second, colleges compete on prestige, not price. Harvard could cut its tuition in half tomorrow, and it wouldn't attract more students because it's already turning away 95% of applicants. What Harvard wants is to be seen as more elite, not more affordable. And the weird thing is, higher prices actually signal higher prestige. If a university suddenly dropped its tuition to $10,000 a year, prospective students would wonder what was wrong with it. There's also a structural problem with how universities budget. Unlike businesses that need to make a profit and have an incentive to cut costs, most universities are nonprofits. They don't have shareholders demanding efficiency. Instead, they have faculty and administrators who advocate for more resources for their departments. University budgeting tends to be incremental. Each department gets a little more each year, but rarely does anyone ask whether certain things should be cut entirely. This leads to cost creep over decades. A program created in 1985 that made sense then might be completely obsolete now, but it's still funded because no one wants to be the person who eliminates jobs.
And here's something most people don't realize. The sticker price of college isn't what most students actually pay. Universities have gotten really sophisticated at price discrimination. They charge a very high sticker price, then offer financial aid packages that vary wildly from student to student based on their family's ability to pay. A student from a wealthy family might pay full price, while a student from a lower-income family might pay almost nothing. This is actually similar to how airlines price tickets. The person sitting next to you probably paid a completely different price for the same flight. But this system creates a lack of transparency that makes it even harder for market forces to push prices down, because no one really knows what anything costs. So where does this leave us? Today, Americans owe over $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. The average borrower graduates with about $30,000 in loans. Many students are making decisions at age 18 to borrow amounts of money they don't fully understand, for degrees that may or may not lead to jobs that can pay off those loans. Meanwhile, universities keep raising prices because they can. The federal loan system keeps expanding because politicians don't want to be the ones who made college less accessible, and the cycle continues. The most mind-blowing part? Other countries figured this out. Germany offers free college to anyone who qualifies, including international students. Finland, Norway, Sweden, same deal. These aren't magical utopias, they're just countries that decided to treat higher education as a public good funded by taxes rather than a private investment funded by debt. They have their own challenges, sure, but their students aren't starting their adult lives underwater. The $2,000 college degree isn't coming back. That world is gone.
But the $50,000 degree we have now isn't the result of some natural economic law. It's the result of specific policy choices, institutional incentives, and market failures that all compounded over decades. And here's the thing, college isn't the only price that exploded like this. Your grandparents bought houses for $7,000. Not $700,000, $7,000. How did that happen? Well, it wasn't just inflation, and it wasn't just supply and demand. There's a wild story involving zoning laws, a financial crisis, and some decisions made in the 1970s that completely changed who gets to own a home in America. That's the next video, and trust me, it'll make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the housing market. If this video made you see college costs in a completely different way, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the housing episode. And drop a comment telling me what price shock you want explained next. I'll see you in the next one.